Wall Street gets a blank check while Main Street picks up the tab. Politicians raise taxes and the private sector picks up the tab. Who's fighting for business and how do we turn things around? Welcome to the only live and local show dedicated to the private sector and turning our economy around. This is Brian Bushlack's Business Briefing on FM News 101 KXL.
7 minutes after 4 o'clock here on a Sunday afternoon as it turns to evening across the great Northwest. Only 13 shopping days now until Christmas. After today, we count down to the holiday season here. Welcome to this edition of Business Briefing. We are the voice of the private sector, top show in our time slot on Sunday afternoons. Thank you for joining us. We are the voice of the private sector, and we have the Rolodex for you business executives, leaders out there. This is your show, and we've got a great one lined up for you. Rob Cornilles is standing by here as our selective executive, just a few moments away from talking to him for the entire first hour of the show. Our next hour, quick preview coming up at 5:07. Our friend Stan Kramer, the local owner of our Qdoba Mexican Grill restaurants, has a great promotion going for the next couple of weeks. We'll talk to him about that and later. Terry Dean from Alpha Broadcasting to talk about the broadcasting industry. What's going on in radio right now is pretty remarkable considering what many of the so-called experts thought just a few years ago. We'll talk to Terry about that as he nears his 40th year in the radio business. Hard to believe Terry's been very successful for that long, but we'll have him in at about 5:20 to talk more about that, and we'll wrap up the show with the author of Breaking Through Walls. The coach, Mike Goss, joins us to talk about today's topic, to sell more. He says, be different. That's coming up at about 5:50 right now, though it's time for this weekend's Select Executive.
Let's get started.
Small business is the backbone of our economy.
You got a future in this business.
And each week, we select a local leader from the private sector.
Well, let's get down to business.
Please welcome this week's Select Exec, presented by WFG National Title. On Brian Bushlack's Business Briefing.
He's a successful business owner. He's employed people, and now he is trying to bring that mentality to a place that sorely needs it, Capitol Hill. Rob Cornilles running for Congress, Oregon's 1st Congressional District. He's in studio. He's also an executive, so this is a great segment for you, Rob. Before we talk politics and get into that a little bit later, I want to really share your story as a business owner with our audience. It's very impressive what you did back in the mid-1990s. Why don't you share that with our audience?
Well, thank you, Brian. It's also a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Well, I'm a native of Oregon, but I actually really started my career in Southern California. Many years ago, I was working, of all places, for the Los Angeles Clippers basketball team.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I couldn't make it as a power forward, so I decided to try the business side, and it was an interesting challenge because back then, and it's not much different today, the Los Angeles Clippers were effectively the worst team in professional sports. At least that's what Sports Illustrated said back in those days. And my job was to fill up the building. And the building existed right there in South Central Los Angeles, the old LA Sports Arena, which, of course, is not used by the NBA any longer. And my job, as I said, was to bring people in, and it wasn't to try to trick them into coming into a game they didn't want to attend, but rather to try to persuade them that there could be found at our games and through an association with our club positive results for their business, for their family, for their nonprofit organization, whatever it may be. And through some strategies and some methods that we incorporated, we were actually able to bring people into the building. The NBA took note of this because it was somewhat alarming that we were driving attendance, and these were paid customers, mind you. And so I began to share some of those ideas with teams around the league. Before you know it, I'm invited to come to Portland and join a gentleman by the name of John Spolstra and his partner, Doug Piper, in a small consulting firm that they had here in Portland at that time. And then 2 years later, I launched GameFace Incorporated out of my house in Tualatin. And GameFace is a company that, while we maintain most of our business in the sports industry, we also work in manufacturing and professional service firms as well, and a whole host of industries. But we're really known for helping professional sports franchises run a more effective, more successful business enterprise through consulting, through training and best practices, and also through the hiring of better trained, better prepared individuals.
If you turned around the L.A. Clippers, I would think you can definitely turn things around in Congress, right?
Well, I tell you, if we were successful with the Clippers, I can't wait to see what I could do with the 1st District, because we have so many more assets, so many more strengths in Northwest Oregon than I ever had to work with in the Clippers. But I will tell you, my firm's been fortunate enough to work with, admittedly, franchises and brands that are at the bottom, but we've also worked with those that are at the top, even the St. Louis Cardinals, the Boston Celtics, the Green Bay Packers. These are some of our clients. But, we work with those who are struggling and those who want to just maintain their competitive edge and stay on top. And so there are certain practices and certain principles that I've learned over the years, not only working with so many household name brands, but also working with small businesses throughout the country. And those principles, such as sticking to a budget, making sure that your people are well prepared for the future, that they've got the proper skills and advantages, just frankly, how to meet a payroll every month. These are simple, basic business principles that, as you said, Brian, we don't see enough of in Congress today, and I think that's one of the reasons we're in the fix we're in.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you talk about the basics. I always like to say, if you can't block and tackle, you're certainly not going to win the Super Bowl, and that applies really in any sector, even the political sector, where you look at what's happened with the debt ceiling debate that went absolutely nowhere and drove us almost over a cliff. Then you see the so-called super committee get absolutely nothing done, not so super by my description. And here we are heading into an election season where every business owner I talk to, and I know you talk to many as well, don't expect anything to happen in the next year, another year of gridlock. And I think people, and the mood I get is that most people out there, not only business owners, but the general population, Republicans and Democrats and everybody in the middle and on the fringe, they're sick of it. What do you get?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's not much of a secret right now. First of all, there's this anger, there's this frustration, there's this disgust about what's happening in Washington, D.C., because while we're back home trying to meet a payroll, trying to expand our products and services, trying to hire, trying to keep those employees productive, we've got people back in Washington, D.C. who are continuing to play political games. Now, I am, as you know, the Republican nominee, but I'm not afraid to call it like it is. There are times when the Republican leadership, I think, has dropped the ball. I think they've not shown leadership, just like the super committee wasn't so super, as you said. There are other times when even our president and Democrats in Congress, they're doing the same thing. They're playing political games with us. And in the meantime, we back here in Oregon, we struggle. And the biggest thing we struggle with is uncertainty. We don't know what kind of leadership is back there. We don't know what kind of policy they're going to be passing, if they'll even pass policy. We don't know what kind of tax code we're looking at so we can plan for the future. We don't know what kind of regulatory issues are coming our way. So we're like a high-speed car going around a corner and not knowing where the road leads. It's frustrating, it's scary, and that's why a lot of business people are sitting on their hands.
And you mentioned the ability to reach across the aisle. I've got some questions for you when it comes to that for our next segment. But being a student of the political game, since I was a kid, and I know you're a fan of Mark Hatfield, who recently passed away. Really, what a champion he was, and we need more Mark Hatfields out there today, don't we?
You took the words right out of my mouth. When I was able to go to his memorial service in the Salem State Capitol a few months ago, those words kept going through my mind. We need more Mark Hatfields. We need more Tom McCalls. We need more Vic Atias. These Republican leaders of Oregon who put aside party affiliation when it was the right thing to do, and they simply tried to find people who would work with them to move our state forward. And I'll never be in their league, but I can try to emulate their qualities. And that's what I want to do as a candidate and certainly as a representative within the next 2 months.
And you, I think, have a great opportunity to do that. Love your new television commercial. We'll talk about that as well. And really the issues. We'll drill it down right here to Northwest Oregon, what we face in Oregon's 1st Congressional District with Rob Cornilles, the man who built GameFace into a national powerhouse right from his, spare bedroom initially in Tualatin, Oregon, to become a national powerhouse, and we're hoping he can do the same in Congress. More with Rob Cornilles. When we come back, we'll talk about his plans to turn things around. That's up next on Business Briefing.
Now, back to Brian Bushlack's Business Briefing on FM News 101 KXL.
And we're back with Rob Cornilles, running for Congress in Oregon's 1st Congressional District here. A special guest this weekend here on Business Briefing. And, Rob, let's kind of boil this down a little bit more. We talked about issues on the national stage in our opening segment. Obviously, the gridlock, the mood of the country. I haven't seen it this bad in my entire life. What do we face locally, though? What do we need to do in this district to really get things turned around? And what can you do to change that?
Well, actually, about a week ago, I announced a jobs plan that I think not only could move the economy forward, but that can actually get passed in Congress. And this is one thing that's very important for voters to look at. When candidates talk about what they want to do, you have to reasonably ask yourself, well, that sounds nice, but can it be done through Congress? In other words, is there enough cooperation in Congress that this idea actually has some traction? And my ideas do. They're frankly bipartisan. Though they're not getting done, I just think we need more people who are willing to get people to the table, because there's evidence that there's an emerging desire to get these things done. Number one, tax reform. Major tax overhaul. Now, what's going on right now and what has been happening for the last 10 years in Congress is they've been piecemealing the tax code. Every year they say, well, let's do this for the next 12 months, or let's pass this extension for the next 18 months. And that's not how business thinks. That's not how entrepreneurs plan. It's certainly not how companies lay down their plans for 5 and 10 years, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I've laid out plans that we should simplify, make more fair, and also make more predictable the tax code. Two main ways you do that. You have to drastically reduce the number of loopholes that are in the tax code, because they are creating an unfair advantage for only the mega corporations. In other words, they're written by attorneys, and the only ones who can figure them out are those who have enough money to pay for attorneys. And small business in Oregon effectively does not fit into that category. But the fact that, say, General Electric made $14.1 billion last year and effectively paid zero federal income tax, to me is unfair. So you have to reduce corporate loopholes, while at the same time you have to reduce all the rates across the board for everybody, including, of course, the middle class that needs it most right now. This will not only put more money into the economy, but it will also decrease, I think, because of the number of jobs it would create, it would decrease government dependence. So our expenses would go down. Here's a second thing, especially specific to the Northwest. We have to have a representative in Congress who will actually be a champion for trade, to sell our products and services across the world, to move those products, not jobs, but products. And I firmly believe, based on the assets we have in the 1st Congressional District, based on the technologies and innovation, whether you're talking about high tech, whether you're talking about agriculture, our fisheries, our timber products, etc., if we are allowed to compete with fair agreements, then I know we can win. But you have to have a representative who's out there championing for those companies and those products and services. And we haven't had that for generations. And the third thing is, business in America needs to know that there's fiscal sanity back in Washington, D.C. And over time, I think we should be passing a balanced budget amendment. You can't do it all at once, because that would constitutionally require us to raise taxes dramatically and also dramatically cut services, including our defense. That's not a healthy situation. That's a bad recipe. But over time, if you put it out, say, 5, 10 years from now, and we know it's coming, then in that interim, we can get our fiscal house in order, and that puts more confidence in investment, that puts more confidence in our country's leadership, and I think that moves the economy forward.
When you boil this down, and for those of you just tuning in, we're with Rob Cornilles, running for Congress in Oregon's 1st Congressional District. When you boil this down, Rob, to those 3 points, it really seems pretty simple what we need to do. It's like this thing right now has gotten so out of control, and it's so far off the tracks, though, that I think most people can't get their head around it. But you really boiled it down right there. That's what we need to do. It's pretty simple.
And the fun thing about this, Brian, is that this isn't. We're not inventing something new here. It was done in 1997 with a Democrat president and a Republican Congress. As we all will recall, in 1997, President Clinton and that Congress decided, you know what? We're going to reduce government spending. We're going to reduce tax obligation. And what happened? We balanced the budget. We ran a surplus. And unemployment was at 4%. So this isn't something that hasn't been done in our country's history. In fact, our own Senator Packwood participated in some major reform like this back in 1986. But what's wrong today is we have such entrenched partisanship among career politicians who do not know how to cooperate. All they know how to do is protect their turf because of that ubiquitous reelection campaign. And so if you put more of the same back in Congress, if you put more career politicians, you're going to get the same results. If you put new people, one district at a time, back in Congress with this type of historical perspective and common business practice, I think we'll start to see a more cooperative environment back there.
I hope you're right, and I agree, too, because I think this election in our lifetimes, I think you're a couple years older than me. We're in our 40s now. And so you can think back to the late 70s and early 80s and remember it. And we look through the past 25 years. I know in my adult life, I cannot remember an election that's more important not only to Oregon, but to our entire nation.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is why we have an Occupy movement, one might argue, is there's so much despair out there.
Yeah.
And anyone sitting in office right now who sees this movement, whether you want to talk about the merits of it is another matter, but there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of uncertainty, not only in the corporate world, but just in the consumer world. And it's shameful. And especially here in Oregon, we're better than this. We should have representation that leads in this area. And wouldn't it be nice, Brian, finally, to have a congressional representative from the Portland area who's business friendly, who understands what it takes to create a job? I've created 60 jobs within my company. I've helped launch 500 careers around the country for people within my industry. So I have that mindset. I have that skill set. And I think this community, this region here in Northwest Oregon, deserves somebody with that kind of background.
And I like what you're saying, too, about the entitlement programs. It's a hot topic, and we're not going to go too political here. But when we come back, we'll talk about that and some other key issues with Rob Cornilles, who's running for Congress in Oregon's 1st Congressional District. Business-friendly. He's looking out for you. We'll also talk more about what he will do to help local businesses. Really, the small businesses aren't so small in our neck of the woods. We got a lot of them out there, and I know you're listening and want to hear what Rob Cornilles has to say. So stick with us through the break. More good stuff coming up in just a bit.
All news, traffic, and weather driving to work and back home. FM News 101 KXL, Oregon's station of record.
And we're back at 4:35 with perhaps the most important conversation we'll have all year here on Business Briefing. If you missed the first half hour of the show, we strongly encourage you to head to our website, KXL.com. Just past the top of the 5 o'clock hour, it will post, and you can listen to the first half of the interview you may have missed with Rob Cornilles, who's running for Congress, Oregon's 1st Congressional District. A lot of great stuff we talked about in our first half hour. Now, Rob, we talked about this a little during the break. I'm a registered Republican, but I have the state of Oregon in my heart, and we talked about Mark Hatfield, and I feel like, the Republicans and the Democrats, and I've got a lot of friends who are Democrats, and I don't want to get too political with the show, but we have to talk about politics because it's so intertwined with business. You've mentioned that you're not running for John Boehner. You're running for Oregon. And I like that because there are a lot of issues that I think the Republicans have really dug their heels in on, and it's kind of given them a bad rap. Same thing for the Democrats who have gone far to the left-hand side. I think most people in America, regardless of their affiliation, want to see people come together. And if we stick with the same people, and if it's at the national level, the local level, the state level, we stick with the same people, we're going to get the same result, right?
Absolutely. And there's three things that you're talking about that come to my mind. First of all, when you speak about this this desire to kind of find middle ground, the Oregon's 1st Congressional District is uniquely situated to do this because we are such a diverse district. There isn't, granted, the Democrats have a higher voter registration, but there's a lot of moderates out there. There's a lot of Republicans out there. Second, this is the first election, federal election of 2012. What happens in the 1st District is going to be watched by the entire country because this happens in late January, as you know. It could set the tone for the rest of the election season next year. And the third thing is very, very important. A lot of people will ask me, well, you're a Republican, you'll be a freshman, you'll go back there, you'll be forced to vote party lines, won't you? And here's what I say. Look, imagine you're John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, the Republican leader, and you have this new congressman from Portland coming into the fold, knowing how diverse Portland is, knowing how long it's been since Republicans had that seat. Are you going to force this guy to vote lockstep with the party? If you do, John Boehner, you know well enough this guy will not be reelected in the fall of 2012. Yep. He'll be ineffective. And if he's ineffective, then you've lost your seat again.
Yeah.
So I'm in a great position, Brian. The voters are in a great position with me being elected in that, A, I'm going to join the majority in the House, which means I can do more. And second, I have the autonomy and the leverage to say to the House leadership, nuh-uh, I'm not following your lead. I'm not asking you which button to push. I'm going to do what I think is best for Oregon. So what an unbelievable opportunity we have right now to be in the majority, to have a business-friendly representative who has the independence necessary to vote and to legislate based on what he thinks is best for his district, not what's best for a party.
And, we touched on the entitlement programs, and I think that, as someone who, I'm 43, and I don't ever expect to get Social Security unless there's some miracle. I know you may not as either. A lot of people our age don't. But for the people who are in their, say, late 50s, 60s, those folks that are there already, it's so incredibly important to protect that, and we need to restructure it. I think everybody in our generation, Gen X on down, realizes we have to do something. We've got to, raise the entry level. We need to do something to it. But there is that strong majority of people that are already there that are extremely concerned about some changes in entitlement programs. How do you do that?
Well, great question, and it is a very important issue in this election. First of all, as I'm hearing it, this is one area back in Congress that may be behind closed doors, but nevertheless, there's some consensus that this is an area with some slight tweaks we can actually work together. Republicans, Democrats alike can work together to fix Social Security. Now, Medicare is a completely different issue. There's a lot more work to be done there. But specifically towards Social Security, as you know, a year ago, President Obama's Deficit Reduction Committee, the Simpson-Bowles Committee, they came back with an 8-month task and full of recommendations on how we should preserve the entitlements and how we lower the deficit. Mm-hmm. Amongst those was, of course, Social Security. And they had several recommendations. These were bipartisan ideas. This is when both sides came to the table. In fact, in their preamble to their report, they said, none of us like this, but that's why it's the best solution.
Exactly.
And I've learned in my own business that the best negotiation is when something has been achieved, yet both sides walk away disappointed. That's when we all gave a little bit. Mm-hmm. We gave something up.
Nobody won.
That's right. Okay. But something's moving forward. And the Simpson-Bowles report, here's the sad part. After it was released a year ago, the president and the Congress flipped through the pages and stuck it in their proverbial desk drawer. Mm-hmm. And nothing's been done on it this year, 2011. I hold the president responsible for that. I hold the Republican Congress responsible for that in the House. And so when I get back there, I'm going to have that thing under my arm. I'm going to say, look, these are some very noteworthy, well-constructed, thoughtful recommendations. I may disagree with some of them, but this is a starting point. One of them, for example, as it relates to Social Security, is means testing. I think that is a viable solution.
Yeah.
Don't know how it's going to end up in the when it's all said and done, but that's something that I think needs to be on the table. I
agree.
I think it's a rational fix.
I agree. Rob Cornilles joining us. He's running for Congress, Oregon's 1st Congressional District. And Rob, you and I both know that Oregon, the agriculture community here, is the backbone of this state. And so with that, immigration is such a huge issue. We got a big audience of farmers and ranchers out there who are very interested to know not only the farmers and ranchers, but the people closer to the metro area who employ Hispanic people. And there's been a big uproar over what's happened in the past few years, and there's such a debate about immigration and, deporting illegal aliens or people who came into the country. And I know that we probably don't have enough time to really go in depth on this, but it's a key issue here for our farmers and agriculture community who rely on these people who have in many cases lived here for a decade or more, are paying taxes, have kids in school, are upstanding members of the community, and yet they're targeted. What do you do about that?
Well, first of all, I have the AgPAC endorsement, and anyone in the agricultural industry knows that that's basically the umbrella organization for farmers, growers, timber, cattle ranchers, etc., throughout the state. And a little more than a week ago, they gave me their statewide endorsement. So they know that I'm with them on these issues. I also have a brother, by the way, an older brother who lives in the area who's owned a landscaping business for nearly 30 years. He and I have had a lot of conversations about this issue as far as where he goes to find reliable workers. And my wife grew up on a tree farm in Yamhill County. I grew up on a tree farm in Yamhill County as well, not as long as she did. But I understand the agricultural industry. First of all, the process of legal immigration is so cumbersome right now. It's so complex and, frankly, inefficient that in some cases, desperate people do desperate things because they don't want to go through that system. We need to simplify and make more efficient the immigration process. And I would add, there are companies right here in the 1st Congressional District who have produced technologies to make that happen. Unfortunately, for years, they haven't had a representative who's pushed them in front of the curtain on a national stage and said, hey, here's a company from Washington County that could actually simplify the immigration process so that illegal immigration isn't so pervasive. But I also think we have to recognize that there are some bad players out there.
Sure.
There are people who've gotten into our country illegally, and they're creating havoc in our communities. So securing the borders, once again, people talk about it, but securing the borders can be done through technologies, not just through armed people on the border. Mm-hmm. And those technologies are found right here in our district. It's a way that I want to be a very effective congressman. To champion them, it will help them increase job creation.
And I am, for the record, for our audience, I'm one of those people. I do not believe that these folks are taking jobs from Americans. I talk to farmers. I know these folks. These are jobs that most Americans would not do. So it's not like they're taking jobs from some innocent American who's on unemployment. We'll leave it at that. And when we come back in our short segment here as we head toward the top of the hour, we'll wrap up with Rob Cornilles, who's running for Oregon's 1st Congressional District. It is a key race. It is probably the most important race in the nation to kick things off here in just a little over a month. More with Rob. We'll talk about business coming up next here on Business Briefing.
This is Brian Bushlack's Business Briefing on FM News 101 KXL.
It's 4:52 now, heading toward the top of the hour with news, traffic, and weather just moments away. And we continue our conversation with Rob Cornilles, who gets our endorsement without question for Oregon's 1st Congressional District. And Rob, I talk to business owners like you do all the time, not only on the air, but behind the scenes, over lunch, coffee, you name it. And I'm a little bit excited to see what's not happening in China now, because many of the business owners I know who operate operations overseas are telling me they think that there might be an opportunity to bring those jobs back home because things are getting so expensive overseas. The only thing they think they would need would be some help from the legislative side to make that a little more affordable in that transition. Do you see that as something that can be done?
It's interesting you bring that up. I had a similar conversation just the other day with a small business owner who's looking to trying to figure out where to put factory operations, and he's frankly facing a dilemma because he sees what some of the tax obligations are in this country. He sees what the regulatory limits are here. But he also is looking, as you mentioned, to Asia, and he's thinking that perhaps it's going to become more stringent over there. The barrier is going to become higher. So, yes, we do have a wonderful opportunity to bring jobs back onshore, if you will. And we do this, as I said earlier, we do it by simplifying the tax code, making it more predictable for business and for investors and those who are planning. We also make sure that they understand that regulatory reform is on the way. Now, it's not going to happen if we have the current mix in Congress. We have to do our part in our individual districts and as a country to put the right people in place. Now, regulation is important, Brian, as you know, because regulation does protect the environment. It protects individuals. But over-regulation is onerous. Over-regulation is where we've gone. We're beyond the tipping point now. Whether you're talking about EPA, whether you're talking about even Dodd-Frank, that's not a physical resource regulation, but it's a regulation on how we move money around in this country. Dodd-Frank, and I've talked to a lot of people who want to lend money. They say this bill did not make it easier for us to lend, and it didn't make it easier for us to borrow. So sometimes Congress, they want to demonstrate that they're doing something, so they go too far. And it's, again, because there's not enough people back there who know how to meet a payroll, who've actually signed the front of a paycheck like I've been doing for 16 years. So it's not that I'm anybody special. I just have some skill sets that are lacking in Congress. So we can continue to think like we've always thought and send lawyers turned politicians who know how to spend other people's money to Congress and get what we've always got, or we can, in Oregon especially, think differently. And that is send someone back who's got practical skills that this economy needs.
I got to ask you, Rob, why in the world do you want to take this on? You've got a successful business. What is inside of you that is motivating you to do this? Because I respect it. I mean, I have those kind of inklings myself from time to time, like I'd like to do something. You want to try and take control of this. What was it in you that provoked you to do this?
Well, there's a couple of things. Very quickly, my youngest son asked me one time as we were sitting on the couch watching a show about the national debt. He asked me when the show concluded, "Dad, am I going to have to pay for all that?" And that's a sobering question coming from a young teenager. He's actually 12 at the time.
Wow.
And I didn't like the answer I had to give him. And the fact of the matter is, Brian, if people like you and I and your listeners and the other guests that you've had on this program throughout the years, if people like us don't decide to really get involved, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
The alternative is more of the same. And I can't stand by and watch that happen, especially you and I were talking off air about the wonderful history of Oregon and what we've done here with our natural resources, how timber and fish, how they built this economy in the early days when we were growing up in Oregon. And now we're losing those industries. And because I don't think we have been active enough in the process. We who try to create jobs and try to grow the economy, sometimes we have to walk away from the boardroom and we need to get into the political arena. And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not into politics." Well, politics is into you. I can assure you.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it every day as a consumer and as a business owner. And so I'm asking people, if they believe in the things I'm saying today, I'm asking them to get involved with me. Our campaign needs their help, but this is a very doable election. We can win this thing.
I think we can as well, and I like what you said because, listen, folks, stop pointing fingers. Stop blaming politicians. You elected those folks, right? It's time for a change. It's time to get engaged. I believe that America in general fell asleep at the wheel over the past decade or so. It's time to take our country back. And Rob Cornilles, you've got our vote for Oregon's 1st Congressional District. We are out of time, but we got to have you back here, and I'm hoping to welcome you back in early February as our representative. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Rob Cornilles joining us here on Business Briefing. If you missed this segment, please, the full hour, head to our website, KXL.com, and podcast this. Great stuff from Rob Cornilles. When we come back, we'll talk to Stan Kramer about his initiative to help the Oregon Food Bank. That's up next.